The council meeting will come to order. If you would please rise and give your attention to Councilwoman De La Isla for the invocation. Remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let us bow our head. Dear Heavenly Father, as we come together to legislate for our community, Father God, give us wisdom. Lord God, for our nation that is in such distress, so many things happening across the nation, just New York, Ferguson, to say just the least, and so many things happening all around. Lord God, I just pray for peace and for wisdom to prevail. Lord Jesus, tonight we have many things on our plate. We have been contacted by several citizens with regards to different matters. We're here to talk about different things that are really important to us. And Father God, for that I ask civility and I pray for peace as we're making the best decisions that we can for our city. It is in Jesus' name that we pray these things. Amen.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
There are no proclamations this evening. Mr. City Manager, I believe you've added a presentation.
I did. Thank you, Your Honor. I would like to ask Chief Jim Brown to step forward and provide some information. There have been many references and emails and discussions pertaining to thank you, pertaining to the action that the Chief initiated pertaining to the SROs. I thought it would be helpful to clarify the situation and ask Chief Brown, not just to talk about that, but talk about some of the things that have been initiated in his first 60-plus days on the job. Seems like 2 years.
Okay. Chief Brown.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Mayor, elected leaders. So it all started about 90 days ago. As I'm doing these independent audits on all of the different divisions, units, and bureaus within the agency, I had the opportunity to review a contract that was up for signature for USD 501 and the SRO program. So as I reviewed the contract, I had some questions that I posed through my police legal advisor. One of those questions was whether or not we were to provide 4 SRO officers or maybe more. It was pretty clear in the contract that we were to provide 4 SRO officers, and that was the contract that had been in place for several years. Somewhere during the tenure of the last administration, the unit grew to 11 officers that were in SROs. So in fact, we had a contract to provide 4 SROs when we were providing 11 SROs. So looking at this contract, I had to make a decision on whether we would honor and respect the contract with 4 or continue with 11. So during my process of going to neighborhood meetings, which I've been to probably several dozen, one of the main concerns from a lot of the citizens was response time. How long did it take officers to respond to calls for service? And I'm not talking about Part 1 crimes where there are homicides, robberies, assaults, those type of things. Our response time is very adequate. It's under 5 minutes. It was the Part 2 and 3 crimes where an individual would come out and their car would be broken into or their home would be burglarized. The response time was not where it needed to be. We are slow in response. So sometimes when the citizens say it took over an hour for the officers to get to these type of calls, they are 100% absolutely correct. It is taking us a while. The bottom line is, in my opinion, we don't have enough people in the Bureau of Operations. Those are the men and women that drive the black and white police cars and take calls for service. So when somebody calls 911, the Bureau of Operations, these officers respond to those calls. So back to the SRO contract. My first meeting was with the Chief of Police for USD 501, and we talked about things, and I told him my concerns. Being a retired law enforcement officer from the city of Topeka, he agreed with those concerns and promised that he would talk to the leadership of USD 501, in which he did. So the second meeting that we had with USD 501 did not go very well. I expressed my concerns and was told that they were not interested in relaxing giving back any officers. And what I was asking for was, we currently have a contract for 4. I would like to bring 4 officers back to the police department and put them in the Bureau of Operations where I need officers on the street making calls for service. Meeting did not go very well, so went back to TPD and strategized a little bit with some of my senior command staff. A couple weeks later, we met again for the 3rd time at USD 501 with the superintendent and Larry Robbins. During this meeting, it was discussed that we had a corporal within the unit that was assigned that wasn't really an SRO. He was working truancy issues. So there was a mutual agreement between the USD 501 and the Topeka Police Department that that individual would be coming back to the police department in December after he used some vacation time. Since then, another officer in the SRO program has since retired, and he's moved on to another state. He's left. That position has not been filled. So the stories were that I have already removed 2 people. That's not exactly correct. The correct statement is one of the individuals was mutually agreed upon, the corporal that was doing truancy that will be back sometime in the month of December, and the other one left the police department on his own accord. So the Bureau of Operations, I believe we are not properly staffed. I believe that my officers are at risk. I believe the officers that work afternoons and midnights are making calls, and their backup sometime is too far away. I know this because I've worked with my officers in their police cars on afternoons, and I've worked the midnight shift with my officers in the police car. And I know that law enforcement is an inherently dangerous job, but I'm duty bound as their chief to make sure that it's properly staffed. Now, I'm not just taking from USD 501. I'm taking from other units within the police department too. I believe we have too many people in specialized units and not enough people in operations. And I believe that citizens would support that based upon the meetings that I've been to and the people that I've spoken with. So for the officer safety, for better response times, that's the reason in which I need to pull officers from different units. So it's not just USD 501. The contract says 4. I'm willing to leave 7. We've had 11 in there for a period of time. I don't know how many years, but it's been quite a while. So with that, are there any questions from the
Are there any
elected leaders?
questions of the chief or comments? Yes, Mrs. Ortiz?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At one time, 501 had their own officers, and then our SRO officers joined them. Is that still the case?
Yes, ma'am. USD 501 has a sworn law enforcement police department. Their officers are exactly trained to law enforcement standards in the state of Kansas. They have the same law enforcement authority and the same powers as a Topeka police officer. They have their own police department. Whether or not they staff USD 501 in our schools with 5 officers, 10, 25, that's not a call of the chief of police for the city of Topeka, Kansas. That's a call for the leadership of USD 501.
Right.
They and they alone set the rules on how many officers they need protecting their schools and our children. That's not my
The
call.
reason
That's
why-
their call.
I just wanted to make sure, Chief Brown, because I know at one time, before we even got into that contract, that they had their own security guards and officers. And I know one of the things that they wanted us to do is to come in because there's things that we could do with the law that they couldn't do with the law, and that's why I asked. Are they fully staffed, or do you know if
They-
their officers are,
Their
school
law-
officers are
Yes.
fully staffed?
Their law enforcement agency has 11 officers, I believe 12 with the chief of police. So I don't know if that's fully staffed. That would be a question for their chief of
Okay.
police.
Okay. And then also, my next question was, I just had a senior moment there.
Okay.
But anyway, I'll think of it and get back with you. I just want the record to reflect that, I've been very impressed with you. I really have. I've talked to you, me and you've talked one-on-one. I've seen you at the NIAs. I've heard your dialogue. I've heard you get beat up by NIAs. I've heard you get beat up by constituents, neighbors, friends, and I'm gonna respect your decisions. And I appreciate you going through everything with a fine-tooth comb.
Thank you, council member. Appreciate that.
Councilwoman Della Isla?
Thank you, Mayor Wolgast. Chief Brown, my question to you is, with the news and as you've been doing your research, which, by the way, thank you for looking at our contracts and making sure that we are working according to what we're saying that we're going to do. What has been 501's response to all this? Has 501 said that they would be interested in partnering with us and helping do a cost share type program? Because, I mean, it seems like the schools themselves. I can tell you that personally, from yesterday to today, I have received several phone calls, and all of these phone calls and emails have been from teachers, from principals, and from parents of children that are in the 501 district. However, I have not heard from the administration, and I think that with such an outcry from the parents, that it would almost immediately, you would expect that you would hear something from the 501 leadership stating that they would be willing to negotiate with us. Has there been any of that occurring?
After the press conference today at USD 501, I elected to show up there because I thought it was imperative that I tell my story, in which I did. I had received a lot of emails today from USD 501 employees, and they were canned messages, which means the makeup of the email was exactly the same for all the emails. So I had a response in which I replied to everybody that had emailed me. Once I did, several of them had emailed back and said, sorry, we didn't understand the whole story. Now that we do, appreciate what you're doing. Thank you for your service, that type of information. One thing also, Councilmember, what I'd like to add, and also the reorganization of the Topeka Police Department, there were some things that we did have control over to make more manpower within the Bureau of Operations, such as moving the K-9 unit to operations. That'll give me 11 additional K-9 officers that will now be making calls for service. Somewhere along the line, the corporals, in which we have 21 of those, were told that they weren't responsible as first-line call takers. That's since been changed. I'm now directing the corporals that they'll start making calls for service unless they're in that supervisory capacity, such as if a sergeant is off that day, that corporal assumes those leadership roles, then he or she must be able to, direct and control without being subject to calls for service. So there's 21 more officers that will be making calls for service. My 11 K-9 officers will be making calls for service, but I have to still pull from these individual units in order to beef up operations. It's just imperative that we have more men and women on the streets making calls for service. That's what the public has demanded since I've been here. I've been paying attention at every single meeting, and this is what they want, and I'm duty bound to the citizens of Topeka, Kansas.
Mrs. Del Isla.
And I appreciate what you just said. Your message is clear in the fact that you are abiding by what the constituents of the city have requested. But has 501 said that they'd be willing to partner with us and help us hire more officers?
So we did have the opportunity to speak after the press conference today, and Mrs. Ford did mention that she was very much interested into meeting with Mr. Colson to being able to find a solution to this problem. And I think there is a solution. I think that if Ms. Ford and Mr. Colson get together, I think there's going to be a solution. I think there was an issue with the letter that was written last week to Mr. Colson informing them of their issues with this. For some reason, didn't make it to Mr. Colson's office until today. This letter was presented to me yesterday during a news interview with one of the local news media outlets. The letter was produced to me. That's the first time I had ever seen it. So I think if Mr. Colson would have got that letter in a timely manner before it was presented to the news media outlets, I think this whole thing probably could have been avoided, but he wasn't given that opportunity.
Okay. Councilwoman Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief Brown, I want to commend you also for the work that you've done, and we have, met privately, and I feel like you are just readily available for any questions that anybody on the council may have. And I do want to say that I know in my district, community policing is very important. It took 45 minutes for police to get to a robbery that was in progress, reported in my neighborhood, and that's way too long. So I really do think community policing is where we need to beef it up, so to speak. We also had an email from somebody that was a graduate from Hayden High School. So, and many of us represent school districts that are not 501, Auburn, Washburn, Seaman, Shawnee Heights. I have grandkids in Shawnee Heights, and I represent a lot of Auburn, Washburn. So my question is, how many schools in Topeka are you not in that you do not have a contract with the schools?
I believe currently right now there's only one middle school that we're currently not in. But here's the thing with that manpower distribution. The way I see it is that if next year we elect to provide 7 officers, I will tell Chief Brown from USD 501, here's the 7 officers. Where he decides to put those officers, I think that's up to him and not Topeka PD. He needs to disperse his workforce where he seems that it's necessary. And thank you for bringing up community policing. It was mentioned several times today that the SROs that we're taking back from community policing, and that wasn't the promise and the strategies. SROs is not part of community policing. It never has been in community policing. It's not even in the same bureau as community policing. I get what they do is very important, and it's part of the overall strategy. But community policing, as we knew it before I got here, has done nothing but increased. A matter of fact, I took 2 of the captains that were working days with weekends off. We've changed their hours. They're now working afternoon shift, the same shift as community policing. One captain will have all the community policing officers on the west side. One captain will have all the community policing on the east side. The problems that I see at some of these meetings is that some of our citizens are asking some pretty tough questions of our officers, and these officers just don't know the answers because they're not in that administrative loop. I think with these captains being there at some of these meetings, they'll be able to answer the questions and be able to be more responsive to the needs of the community. So if anything, I've increased it by adding 2 more captains to the community policing unit. But the SROs is not part of community policing. So when I'm drawing down from that particular unit, that function, it's not community policing. Community policing is what it is, and I have no intention on removing any officers from community policing. If anything, we'll enhance it and we'll increase it.
Mrs. Schwartz?
My question, though, is do we have TPD at Hayden? Do we have TPD at the Auburn Washburn schools? Do we have TPD in the Shawnee Heights and Seaman districts? Because those schools they all have city residents that attend those schools.
You know, I'm not sure, ma'am. I would have to
I
go back
would
and
really
check.
like some follow-up to see what are TPD, what schools they are not in, and what schools they are in.
Is this, perhaps there is an, what the, okay,
Are they're all in the county?
yeah,
But there's some, yeah, they're both.
well, yeah,
They're
I,
both.
yeah, I don't,
The sheriff's department is in some of those schools.
okay. Yeah. Mr. Colson?
Your Honor, will clarify that and provide
Okay, yeah.
information.
I believe
Okay.
that we just support USD 501. If there are
think
another
so.
school district outside of USD 501, ma'am, I don't believe that we have any presence whatsoever in those schools. But I will find out 100% because I want to be truthful and honest with my answers.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Hiller?
Thank you, Mayor. I realize that to some extent, a shift in how we deliver services doesn't change necessarily what we want to deliver. It's just how we would do it. And I suspect that in some form, the desire for SROs, both in the building, was to have them close by so if something happened. And we were, for many years, weak on numbers in patrol, and we weren't filled in our community policing unit either. I don't know how far conversations have gone, so any answer's okay to this, but has there been thought or discussion that of what the shift might be if we have more people available, officers available on patrol and in community policing? Can that help serve some of the needs that 501 or any school district was hoping we would fill?
You know, I think so because I believe that every parent that has a child in USD 501 sometimes becomes a victim of some type of a crime, and I think that we would be more responsive with more officers on the street. There are several areas within the city that I would prefer to have 2 people in a police vehicle, a 2-person unit. That would help with that response time because sometimes the backup time is a long time for an officer to wait for a backup. So, you know, in effect, putting more officers on the street will help with anybody that resides in the city of Topeka.
Well, I know, for instance, that when there have been incidents, then what happens is patrol helps out. I mean, they show up and help out. There's not just the one officer when something's actually occurred. So
Correct.
I appreciate your diligence and your thoughts.
Yes, ma'am. So the way our districts are broken out is at any given time, there's 12 patrol officers on the street handling calls for service. In USD 501 on any given day with their 12 plus our 11, there's over 20 security personnel providing security for our schools, but I have 12 in the entire city of Topeka officers in patrol making calls for service. I need to increase that.
Councilman Manspeaker?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I say good work. This is why we try to hire good people, so that when they take, what I always worry when you hire somebody new is that sometimes it takes a while to acclimate. And it's difficult at times to make decisions that can be upsetting to some folks because change is difficult, and I get that. But what's happening today right now is proving to me that we hired the right person to be our police chief. and that is to find places where we have inefficiencies and fix those problems. I think that's a really important thing, and I think that I understand the concerns that I've heard from folks, but I would just echo what I said earlier today, which is if you actually have concerns about the safety and the security of the schools in 501 school system, you need to contact the school board, not the city council, because our budget's not responsible for the security of the schools. It's responsible for the security of the city. And I think that's a very important job that has a much, as you said, these children could have parents in the home that have a crime committed against them, and now they're not getting an officer called on them. It's a very umbrella experience with law enforcement, with our PD. It's not very targeted, and I think schools actually managing their own security forces or police forces makes them is a better decision because they can manage their own people, and it's not other folks. And I actually have, I'm probably going to get a hate text or something here pretty soon, but my sister's a principal in 501. She has an SRO at her school. I understand why she has that SRO at her school. I have heard of things that have happened at her school that were pretty bad. I've heard of things where she was worried for her life and needed a law enforcement officer there. But the reality is that we can respond quicker if we're not stationary in one place and can't get away from it. So to be able to respond to crime, from my perspective, this is a better move than actually putting those officers in the school. So I appreciate you finding this and trying to solve the problem. I would encourage our elected colleagues at the school board to examine whose responsibility it is to provide security, because I would strongly argue that it is theirs, and equally the paying of said security should be included in their budget, not in the city of Topeka's budget. We all want a safe and secure community. I imagine that that is your goal, not to make Topeka less safe, but to make it more safe. So I think we're on the right track. Thank you very much. You're doing a great job.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there other questions? Councilman Brown?
Chief Brown, I've been following the changes you've been making, and I support them. I think you're doing a great job so far, and it's obvious that your focus is to put more officers on the street and to decrease the response times. Over an hour is unacceptable. I'm glad you recognize that. A couple questions for you. It sounds to me, if I'm understanding correctly, that your intent is to reduce down to 7 officers assigned to 501. Is that to occur at the end of the school year?
Okay, so how I see that occurring is that currently there are 11 with a contract with 4. So for the remainder of this year, the remaining 10, I believe, that are currently there, they will remain in-house on the job for the entire school year. My request to USD 501 was please work very, very hard the rest of this year in the summer to find an avenue to relax some of those officers to bring them back to TPD. So my intent was never to bring them back all at once or to dissolve the entire unit. And I was very, very clear with my 3 meetings with USD 501 leadership was that my intent was never to take all the officers this year. Just please find a way, work within your staff. And, the council member had mentioned earlier that, they're responsible, USD 501 leadership and their board of directors are responsible for how many security officers they have in their schools. If they believe there's going to be an issue, then they have the right and the authority and the budget to make as many police officers they want. They're certified law enforcement officers, just like my officers are.
Yes.
Just a couple other quick things. Following on what you just said, and something Councilwoman Ortiz alluded to, is there any distinction between the authority wielded by your officers and the officers for 501?
There is absolutely, positively no difference. They are certified Kansas law enforcement officers with the same authority and arrest powers as my Topeka PD officers. Several of them are retired Topeka PD officers, including their chief of police.
All right, thank you. I hope going forward, and I expect going forward, that you and the city manager will work out a partnership change is difficult, but I hope you'll work out a partnership that remains mutually beneficial to the district as well. Thank
Yes, sir.
you.
Thank you. And it is a great partnership and a great relationship. And we're wanting to help. We're wanting to augment their police department by providing 7 additional officers to give that, that force multiplication for those officers. But a contract for 4, giving them 7, I think that's more than fair. And it's a good partnership.
Other comments or questions? Mrs. Ortiz?
The last question I have is, when does the contract end? Because I thought we just renewed it not too long ago. And that's when my question was, what do they do in the summertime? And I was told that they come and they work for the city when they're not in the schools or when school is out.
The current contract right now has not been signed because there's issues with their interpretation of 11 versus mine for 4. My interpretation and my legal counsel for the police department, it's pretty clear that it says 4, and I think CJ Online has the contract, so anybody is available to go and look and read the contract. So as soon as we get that worked out, and we, meaning Mr. Colson and Dr. Ford, then we'll proceed down the road with a signed contract. But right now, the contract has not been signed.
Okay. And Chief Brown, I was told that there's certain things that officers can do and certain things that SRO officers could do, or not SRO, school officers can do, and that's why they wanted those officers in the school. And I will try to find that notes when I was told that. Now you're telling me something different. I just want to know, so when we get ready to renew this contract again, I understand it.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any differences, and I am very grateful for the passion that our community has with our SROs and the relationships in which they have with these SROs. That's telling me that my men and women are out there treating everybody with dignity and respect, and they're doing what we expect them to do. So that's very, very pleasing to me. However, overall, I've got the entire city to look after and to protect, and
Understood.
Are there other,
Thank
Mrs. Hiller?
It sounds like we've entered this a little bit awkwardly. On the other hand, USD 501, as we all know, just had a big bond issue and is doing major physical security improvements to all of those schools. And when you do something like that, that would be a logical time to step back and say, okay, now what do we really need? We're taking care of some of the things that we used to do with people, with technology. And so I do hope that the conversations can be all about how can we mutually work together. What do you need now? And how can we mutually work together? Because I think what they need has changed, or is in the process of changing. We recently got a report of the progress on shifting that technology into the schools too. So,
Are there other questions, comments? Thank you very much.
thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Appreciate your
city leaders.
presentation, your response to all the questions.
Thank you.
See, there are no other presentations. We will proceed with the roll call.
Mayor Wolgast,
Here.
council members Hiller,
here,
Brown, Ortiz, Everhart, De La Isla,
Here?
Manspeaker,
Here.
Schwartz,
Here.
Schmidt,
Here.
and Harmon.
The Deputy Mayor Everhart is ill this evening and unable to attend the meeting. We will then, we want to announce to the council there are no additions or deletions to the minutes, to the agenda, and there is no executive session this evening. So we will proceed then with the consent agenda.
A is a board appointment recommending the appointment of Steve Mohan to the City of Topeka Board of Building and Fire Appeals for a term ending December 31, 2016. B is a board appointment recommending the appointment of Don Rowe to the City of Topeka Board of Building and Fire Appeals for a term ending December 31, 2016. C is a board appointment recommending the appointment of Dave Krug to the City of Topeka Board of Electrical Appeals for a term ending December 31, 2016. D is a board appointment recommending the appointment of Sean Smith to the City of Topeka Board of Electrical Appeals for a term ending December 31, 2016. E is denial of tort claim appeal filed by John Bose seeking compensation for damage to his lawnmower in the amount of $292.78. F is a denial of a tort claim appeal filed by Angela Newsom seeking compensation for vehicle damage caused by a pothole in the amount of $2,200. G is denial of a tort claim appeal filed by John Wright seeking compensation for property damage caused by the Topeka Police Department during the execution of a search warrant in the amount of $10,000. H is minutes of the regular meeting of December 2nd, 2014, and there's a list of applications for you. Staff is requesting approval.
And council members, again, those first 4 appointments are actually reappointments, not new appointments. And actually, this completes our boards for the end of this calendar year, when we have a number of them. Next week, there will be a few that we will be completing due to terminations and end of appointments. And what is your pleasure, Mrs. Delisla? Mrs. Delisla moves to approve. Councilman Harmon seconds. Discussion. All those in favor vote yes. Opposed vote no.
We have 8 yes.
8 having voted yes, the consent agenda is approved. We will proceed with the action items. The first item A is an ordinance for revenue bonds. If the clerk would read.
A is an ordinance introduced by City Manager Jim Colson authorizing the issuance of $45,410,000 aggregate principal amount of combined utility improvement and refunding bond series 2014A of the City of Topeka, Kansas, under the authority of KSA 10116A and KSA 10-1201 at SEEK and all amendment thereto.
Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to ask Brandon Kaufman to come to the mic and to provide information and answer questions on this item.
Thank you. Mr. Kaufman.
Good evening. I'm going to pass around a summary sheet here for everybody to review. Real quick, while that's passing around, Mayor and members of the council, you have 2 items before you tonight. One is an ordinance, which is basically authorizing the issuance of the $45,510,000 or $45,510,000 in bonds, and then there's also the resolution that covers the revenue bonds that basically prescribes the terms and agreements with the buyers. So we today conducted the pricing for the bonds with the assistance of our financial advisor, Columbia Capital, with Jeff White and Kaylin Dwyer, and then also our bond counsel with Phil White with Nichols and Wolf. The city conducted a competitive sale recently. Last week, Columbia Capital notified the market of the upcoming sale. We received the bids this morning. I would, based on what we received, I'd say that they're highly competitive bids.
You want to wait a minute because
Okay,
we're still,
yeah.
we don't have the sheets yet, and it's hard to hear, listen, and we're not on the same page yet. Okay.
Okay. And Mayor and members of the council, this is also the same sheet that was emailed out earlier today for your information. So you have that summary sheet in front of you. The bids were received this morning. They were highly competitive. You can see that we received 7 bids. The winning bid was at 3.131 for the true interest cost. We recently also conducted a rating with Moody's, and they confirmed our rating at AA3, which was what we received last year also with Moody's. A couple things that they noted: to increase the ratings would take a significant increase in the cash balance or a sustained increase to the debt service coverage ratio. To decrease the rating, it would take a decrease in the debt service coverage ratio and then also a deterioration of the system service area. So I think there's some opportunity perhaps in the future that if we could increase that debt service coverage ratio, there could be a possibility for a rating increase there. As you can see on the first page there, it lists the 7 bidders in rank of their bid. On the second page, it's a summary of the prior debt service coverage or debt service, and then also a chart at the bottom of the prior debt service. You can see that in those in the first basically 10 years, it's a relatively flat structure where we'd like to see more of a slope to that. So if you look at the third page, that covers the refunded savings and is a summary of the refunded savings. So we basically structured the savings of those bonds over the first 10 years so that we could try to get more slope in those first 10 years and see more of a downward slope with those bonds.
And the actual amount is the 45,510,000.
Yes, sir.
And council members, and as we always do this, the FID number is different than what is in the ordinance, because this is what we actually sold for. So their numbers are different, but that's acceptable as part of the ordinance. And then a portion of this is refinancing of current ones. Approximately how much is that, and then how much are the new bonds?
So the debt service policy actually requires that we have a 3% savings, and then also our FA recommends a 5% saving for advanced refunding. So the current savings is at 12.2%. So it's a pretty significant savings over current
Okay.
debt service. So.
All right. Council, questions, comments? Councilwoman Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Brandon, you've done a terrific job of explaining very difficult numbers here. It says that it's the 45 million for the combined utility improvement and refunding revenue bonds. Is that what was in the budget? I mean, this is just process we have to go through.
So working with our financial advisor, they'll go through and review all our bonds annually and look if there's an opportunity to refinance those for savings. So based off of what was passed in the 2015 budget, this would be a savings off of what was already appropriated.
And then there are some new bonds that isn't
Correct.
refinancing.
That is correct.
And
Yes.
that's about how much of the 13 million or so? Is that,
It was approximately 13 million and
all right?
that we needed for projects.
For new projects
Yes.
that we have approved.
Yes,
That have
sir.
been approved. Councilwoman Hiller?
I do have 3 questions. Of that 13 million, when I look at the third page and just trying to understand these and make sure I see what is correct, when you've got on the third page, it shows that our debt service prior was a total of 49.4 million, and it included just the bonds that we're refinancing, nothing new? Is that what I'm seeing?
So you, Councilmember Hiller, you're looking at the third page here.
Yes, sir.
Okay. That is the before debt service
Correct.
compared to the updated without the new revenue that was, or the new additional funds that were needed for the projects being financed.
Correct. I guess what I was looking at was that the 2014A in the middle column includes the new $13 million, correct? But the column on the left does not include the new $13 million?
Councilmember Hiller, I believe that does not include in order to show kind of a side-by-side of what the savings is from the prior to the current. So if you looked at the debt service before, it was about 4.3 million, and then the new debt service, excluding the new money, would be about 3.7 million for a savings of 575,000 per year.
So this is just comparing the refunding, it's not addressing the new?
Councilmember Hiller, that is correct, yeah.
Thank you. That's helpful to me. I had my second question on the 2006B bonds. It looks like they were supposed to pay off in 6 years, but there were only 6 payments left. Why would we refinance them for 30 years?
Councilmember Hiller, so the way that the bonds were structured is that it wasn't taking the term of it and stretching it out over 30 years, so they still have the same payment term, but the new money that was issued is for 30 years, but the old would have been, followed that same structure. So we didn't extend the life of the previous bond.
Okay, so that particular bond issue at a new rate that we spent some money for will still pay out by
That's correct.
2021. Thank you. And then I'd sent in a question to you late, so I didn't surprise you with this. We've talked on and off over recent years about why, even though utility bonds we've always financed them for 30 years, that they don't have to be financed for that long. And I wondered what the cost would have been were these issued as 20-year or 15-year bonds.
Councilmember Hiller, I'd probably refer to our financial advisor to see if they had any available information on it.
Yeah,
Your
Mr.
Honor,
Colson?
I would prefer that we don't answer. I mean, we'll provide an answer,
Yeah.
but to figure that out standing up here would not be good.
Well, the reason I asked is that we've discussed this before when issuing bonds. For our other general obligation bonds, we'd been borrowing for 20 to 25 years and realized that our policy suggested 15, and when we backed them up, it was a lower rate and the payments were similar. And so I just want to keep that issue out there for us not to do 30 years and have all of that, even though we're saving money, if we could have done even better.
Are there other questions? Okay. Okay, we are looking at the ordinance, authorizing the issuance of the revenue bonds is the first step, and it's your pleasure. Ms. Delisla moves to approve. Mr. Brown seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor vote yes. Opposed vote no. I vote yes.
We have 8 yes, Ms. Hiller voting no.
8 having voted yes, the ordinance on the revenue bonds is approved. We then go to item B, which is the resolution for those revenue bonds. Clerk would read.
B is a resolution introduced by City Manager Jim Colson prescribing the form and details of combined utility improvement and refunding revenue bond series 2014A of the City of Topeka, Kansas, in the aggregate principal amount of $45,510,000, the issuance of which was authorized by the city pursuant to its ordinance passed and approved December 9, 2014, authorizing the execution of an escrow trust agreement by and between the city and Security Bank of Kansas City, Kansas, and authorizing certain other documents and actions in connection with the issuance of the bonds.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Kaufman is available to answer any questions. This is related to the last item.
Yeah, and the resolution which then allows us to actually do what we said we have already done. Are there any questions? Ms. Delisla. Ms. Delisla moves to approve. Mr. Brown seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor vote yes. Opposed vote no. I vote yes.
We have 8 yes, Ms. Hiller voting no.
8 having voted yes, the resolution is approved. We go to item 5C, public hearing appropriation on the budget amendments.
C is a public hearing for the purpose of hearing and answering objections of taxpayers relating to the proposed amended use of funds, amending the 2014 City of Topeka operating budget, and an appropriation ordinance introduced by City Manager Jim Colson approving and adopting certain amendments to the operating budget for the City of Topeka for the year 2014, and appropriating the amounts for the purpose as set forth therein.
Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to ask Mr. Gerber to provide information on this, explain what this does, and answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Gerber.
Mr. City Manager, Mr. Mayor, thank you. As always, I'll give you a brief overview and then stand for questions. This is what I would call a routine procedure that's allowable under Kansas state law that most cities, including the City of Topeka, avail themselves to on a yearly basis. A general reason for that is, as was stated, we are amending the 2014 budget. This budget was adopted by the City Council in August of 2013. It can be challenging to predict what's going to happen by December of 2014 and August of 2013, and so we are available and allowed to make amendments to the budget. If adopted, this would increase the 14 budget by $7.2 million. Those expenditures would come from either existing revenues or fund balances, and so there's no new monies that are needed to go to this process. The reasons for the budget amendments in each of the 5 funds that we have before you are different, but I'm glad to answer specific questions on those if you have them. Otherwise, we would recommend approval.
Okay, and we heard a work session or presentation on this earlier. Council members, any questions to Mr. Gerber about the specifics, Mrs. Schwartz?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Doug, you and I have had conversations by email, what this was for. And I had a constituent that said it's a new word, misbudgeted. $7 million is a lot of money to be changing around. So can you break it down as to what exactly that 7 million, where it was budgeted, and now that we're moving it to another budget, even though it's no new money?
Yeah, Mr. Gerber.
Mrs. Schwartz, I'm pleased to do that. It is a fairly substantial sum, but again, they come from revenues that exist or revenues that came in that we didn't anticipate, as well as potential additional expenditures that we didn't anticipate. For example, a good example of this is the Employee Separation Fund, which we're asking for an amendment. When the council adopted the 14 budget in August of 13, that fund didn't even exist. Later that year, later in 2013, the fund was established, but there's no budget authority associated with that fund, and so this just gives budget authority for that particular fund. In another case, for example, the TGT fund, that's allowing us to take funds that are designated for the soccer project, Sunflower Soccer, and move them into a project fund. That wasn't done as part of the 14 budget process.
And you want to state what that acronym is that you just used?
I'm sorry, the Transient Guest Tax Fund, the TGT fund. For the TIF, the Tax Increment Financing Fund, we had revenues and expenditures that were different than were anticipated, and so that allows us to make our debt service payments. With the half-cent sales tax fund, that was probably a case where it just wasn't budgeted appropriately. We need to expend all the money out of that fund every year. We were budgeted for $3.5 million. We need substantially more than that, so that's where the bulk of this budget amendment comes from.
Other questions? Mrs. Hiller?
Thank you, Mayor. I do have questions about the employment or the Employee Separation Fund, what it's called. My recollection, as you described, was that we, at the recommendation of staff, the city actually floated bonds because we were concerned that there would be a deficit in the retirement fund. And so we were setting up a fund that was supposed to be, I thought, temporary to handle the proceeds from those bonds. And I thought, similar to the one that we have for health insurance, that it was sort of a backup fund and that we were going to be transferring money over. When I look at the retirement reserve fund, we only budgeted $700,000 in expenses from that fund. This is from the September 30th financials. And we haven't spent anything out of it year to date at all. And then we have this proposal, so we still have the 700,000 in there. We have a proposal to put 1.2, I've got it right here, 1.2 million basically in additional expenses out of the Employee Separation Fund. And so I was confused. That led me to some questions. One was, have things changed that we need a total of $2 million in expenses instead of 700,000 for this year?
Mrs. Hiller, no. What this allows us to do, that Employee Separation Fund was established at the end of 13, and I'm not sure what all the discussion that was associated with that was.
Mm-hmm.
But what we believe this amendment allows us to do is to build the retirement reserve fund. We'll spend down the bond money, the bonds that have already been issued. It allows us to build the retirement reserve fund so that we don't put ourselves in that position moving forward.
So if I may, so to spend directly out of this fund instead of spend out of the retirement reserve fund during the life of this fund?
Indeed.
So therefore, the 700,000 is budgeted, but it's not going to get spent out of retirement reserve.
I believe that's correct, yes.
If I can, the employee separation fund also, we borrowed 5 million, I thought. And it's coming in, it looks like the starting balance was 4.47. I just wondered what happened.
Mrs. Hiller, I can't answer that question. You're correct that we did issue 5 million in bonds, but I'm not sure what the differential is.
Thank you. I know that we need to move forward with these budget changes so that the staff can do them by the end of the year, but I certainly hope that the reconciliation between those two funds and the clarification about the starting balance could be looked into and reported.
Okay.
Thank you.
This is an appropriation ordinance, a budget amendment, so appropriately, we are required to have a public hearing. The public hearing is now open. Is there anyone in attendance that wishes to speak to these amendments of the budget? Seeing none, we will declare the public hearing closed, and we are ready to proceed with action on the ordinance. Mr. Brown moves to approve the appropriation ordinance, the budget amendment. Ms. Della Isla seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor vote yes. Opposed, vote no. I vote yes.
We have 9 yes.
9 having voted yes, the appropriation ordinance on the budget amendments is approved. We go to item D, an ordinance on the medical response agreement.
D is an ordinance introduced by City Manager Jim Colson providing for the renewal of a non-exclusive franchise to American Medical Response to operate an ambulance service within the City of Topeka, which replaces the franchise ordinance codified by City Code Appendix B, Article 6, that will expire December 31, 2014.
City Manager?
Thank you, Your Honor. I would ask Mr. Sublette, City Attorney, to explain what this is. I will remind people that this is an ordinance that comes forward each year, and it's the equivalent of a franchise fee, and provides non-exclusive rights to those. But Mr. Sublette can answer any questions. I think I might have just made your presentation.
Mayor, yes,
Sublette.
that is essentially the presentation. This appears before you every year. It expires December 31st. The only change is line 36, where the date is changed.
Okay, are there questions for Mr. Sublette? We have one person who has requested to speak, Chance Lammer.
Good evening, Mayor, ladies and gentlemen of the council. I just had a couple questions in general about the ambulance service. When you call through the 911 dispatch center, you are, for requesting an ambulance service and law enforcement, the ambulance service, they have you transferred over to the actual ambulance service. And I believe that I see a very time difference, especially like if somebody's having a heart attack. By the time you transfer people to the other dispatch. I was just wondering why that is, and then also the cost of the ambulance service on a yearly basis.
Actually, we're approving the agreement with them. Do you have information, or we can get it for those questions? If you can, unless you want to respond to it now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think in terms of the cost of that, that's really something that's borne by the county. It's not a city issue. I'm certain that AMR would be happy to outline some of those issues in terms of this particular agreement. Dispatch does start through the 911 service. It is sent to the technical experts so that they can identify what the most appropriate response is. But I don't know that now is the time that we could do an adequate explanation of all of that, but I'd happy to meet with you, and I'm certainly sure that AMR or our fire department would be happy to meet with you also.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Yeah, no, this is the Shawnee County has the agreement with the ambulance service. This our contract merely approves their right to do business in the city, and that's what we're acting on here. Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Other questions? Your pleasure. Mrs. Schwartz moves to approve the ordinance. Mr. Schmidt seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor vote yes. Opposed vote no. I vote yes.
We have 8 yes, Mr. Manspeaker voting no.
8 having voted yes, the ordinance on the medical response franchise agreement is passed. We will proceed to item 5E, a charter ordinance.
E is a charter ordinance introduced by Deputy Mayor Denise Everhart, amending City of Topeka Code Section A224 concerning duties of the mayor.
In the absence of the deputy mayor, legal will provide the introduction.
Thank you, Mayor. On the first charter ordinance, proposed charter ordinance change that's in front of you, while we all know the mayor is a member of the governing body, under our current charter ordinance, those voting rights are restricted to voting only on matters where state law requires governing body action. The proposed change would allow the mayor to vote on all matters except for ordinances for which state law gives the mayor veto rights. It would also change the use of the veto to conform to state statute. As we are all aware, because we've had a number of discussions on the charter, or the proposed change to the charter amendments, charter ordinance, Citizens Review Committee looked at this. We have to do this every 10 years. I believe this was one of their recommendations. And Deputy City Attorney Mary Feeney is also here. She worked very closely with that committee and can answer any technical or specific questions to that.
Okay. And council members, there was a sheet distributed at your places that provides background on it. Are there questions or comments for Mr. Sublette or that you wish to make? And then we can have those, and then we will go to our persons who signed to speak. Mrs. Heller.
This would be a question perhaps for you, Mayor. The Citizens Review Committee made a number of recommendations. We've got a whole packet. This is one of them, but there were a variety of others. I understand that the 2 we have before us today are here because they would need to be identified as ones that might or might not go to the ballot. Could you explain where the rest of that package is, what the plan is to bring?
Okay.
Because there would be residual things we'd need to deal with, for instance, if this is passed as well.
Now, thank you, and I think I can speak to that, or actually it's what legal is recommending. The 2 ordinances here pertain to the recommendations that must be voted on by the people. And the thinking was that these would be handled, and if the council approves to take them to the people, and then possibly that the voters approve them, then various implementations would be made. There are some other recommendations that don't require, of course, a vote that could be handled now, but they thought it'd be best to get these going, and then that can be sort of a time frame. And I think, Ms. Faney, is that, you want to add or delete? Okay. Does that
Thank
answer
you.
the
I think
question?
that just helps because I wanted it to be sure we all knew where we were and also to have the citizens and the Citizen Review Committee know that we were looking at addressing all of them
Right.
eventually. So, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Sublette?
If I could expand on the Deputy City Attorney's comments. From the back row. There's a time, if I'm not wrong, there's a timeline issue that in order to get these on the ballot on April 7th, the approval would have to take place before the middle of January with a meeting schedule. That's why they were placed, so that we could make sure they were either approved or not approved. So we would know whether we have to construct the ballot question and get it ready for the April 7th election.
Other comments, questions? Or? We can go then to the public comments, and the first signed to speak is Mr. Jim Reardon.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you for allowing us to be here this evening. The Citizens Committee to review the form of government did take up this matter and made recommendations. I do want to point out that the committee included Judy Moeller, who is not able to be with us this evening, Tina Williams, who is not here either, John Nave, who is here, and Maynard Oliveris will be here, and they'll have comments as well, so I'll keep mine very brief as required. We want to thank you for, first of all, for appointing us and for allowing us to examine the workings of city government, to learn from knowledgeable people and to include the citizens of Topeka and to make our unanimous recommendations to you. We think it's a very important exercise to open up the process of government to public inquiry and to hear the thoughts and concerns of the citizenry, and we commend your actions in empowering our committee. The overriding matter of concern that we found was based on the committee's hearing in a meeting with Don Moeller, who was the former executive director and general counsel of the Kansas League of Municipalities. And in his briefing, Mr. Moeller identified what's perhaps the major issue of concern, and that is no clear direction. And in understanding that, you have to go back to 2005 when the council manager form of government became effective as a result of the transition to the city manager form of government and the transfer of duties to the city manager. The charter ordinance was rewritten. It was anticipated that the role of the mayor would be diminished by the transfer of administrative duties to the city manager, and as a result, the mayor's salary was very substantially reduced, but the diminution of duties never took place. The charter ordinance was written in a way that creates unnecessary tension in the city government because there's no clear direction as to the roles of the mayor and the city and the council members as a governing body. The general term mayor and district council members is used frequently throughout the charter ordinance. Topeka may have the only charter ordinance in the state written in this manner. Moeller believed that the language contributes to misunderstandings and unintended consequences. He also believed that some current language tying trying to limit the mayor's authority to vote may violate statutory authority. Can I have
You have one more minute.
a couple more? Okay, fine. Statutory authority. So he suggested that the committee consider the roles of the mayor and council members in terms of governing body. Mayor Bunton also agreed with that scenario. The current mayor, Walgast, told us that he believed that the mayor and council are a working unit, and they believed that the current processes and terminology are confusing. So the committee recommended that the governing body include the mayor and that all 10 governing body members will be voting members with the exception of the mayor, and that the mayor will not have a vote on any matter upon which he has been given veto power. This ordinance takes the first step towards clarifying the charter ordinance and addressing the areas of concern noted by the committee. We want to thank you, Ms. Everhart, for introducing the ordinance and the council for taking this matter up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Yeah, I'm sorry, you have questions?
Sure.
Councilman Harmon?
Thank you, Your Honor. Jim, thank you very much for heading up this committee and for all your work and guidance on it. Did the committee look at, well, let me back up. I certainly acknowledge the ambiguities and internal inconsistency within the charter ordinance with respect to the office of the mayor. We're not the only city in the state of Kansas that has a city manager form of government with mayor and council members. How do other cities in Kansas, what does their charter ordinance look like as compared to ours with respect to defining the role of the mayor? Did you have a chance to look into what other cities in Kansas are doing?
We did, and in one of the appendices of the report, we had summed up some of that, but essentially, I think there's one thing that came out of it, and that essentially was that we kind of thought that maybe some of the language that had to do, I believe, with Overland Park, where Mr. Mays, I think it's Overland Park, one of the Kansas City
It's
area.
actually Olathe.
Olathe, that was it. Had the start of something that looked similar, not the way it looks today, but the way it might look as far as language is concerned. I'm not really prepared to address that this evening,
Okay.
but there
Okay.
were some similarities, and we did address that in the appendices.
All right, thank you very
in the
much.
report.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Other questions from Mr. Reardon? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next is Maynard Oliverius.
Mr. Mayor and council members, I'm Maynard Oliverius and appreciate the opportunity to be before you. I'll be very, very brief. I also served, as Jim pointed out, on the review committee. And I think what we attempted to do, based upon the input from various council members and the mayor and many others that we talked with in the community, was simply to clarify and make very specific what the mayor could vote on and not vote on. And so that's a pretty straightforward ordinance that we're talking about. So again, appreciate the opportunity to serve. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Okay, the next person is John Nave to speak. Mr. Nave.
Good evening,
Good evening.
council members, mayor, city manager. We talked years ago when we changed to city form of government. It was a task. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was a plan that needed to be in place. I'm going to be honest, when it first was put on the table and we worked it for months and months, I had reservations. But after going through a few years and the years go by, it was a good plan that needed to be done to change it to a city manager form of government. And what we didn't do is, or didn't, put together completely, is the role of the mayor. And the citizens of Topeka, they look to the mayor for leadership, and they look to the mayor for answers. And the office of they don't call. They call all of you and the city manager, but they also the mayor's office receives a lot of calls. But what we saw in our deliberations with the community is they want a stronger voice from the mayor, and that's what we hope to accomplish here. I think also I'll speak on this and then we'll come back to the others later. Okay. But I want to thank you all for allowing us to come and speak before you, and hope you do serious considerations for this proposal here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Okay, the next person is Joseph Ledbetter.
Governing body, I was looking at this, didn't get as much time as I wanted to review it, but on face it seemed innocuous. It seemed like it was okay. I supported the manager form of government when it wasn't popular, and went ahead and pushed it anyway, and along with Betty Dunn, Betty Phillips, and some others back in that day. And I was always concerned with the 05 that it had ambiguities in it and conflicts that didn't make a lot of sense. I think one of the things that they tried to do was keep some of the vestige of power of the mayor with the manager, and it clearly says he has no administrative duties, the manager. I'm sorry, excuse me, the mayor. And the manager form of government, that is their job. Now, the role of the council is the board of directors. That doesn't mean you advocate your duties to oversee, like on JADO, which I've talked to you about. But anyway, you know, I did have one of my clients questioning this. It's not in here, so it must be in that batch of recommendations you didn't talk about. But he was concerned with the mayor making all the appointments under this form of government. He wanted to see council members able to appoint people, maybe like we did years ago. We had a zoo committee where we had a terrible problem with the zoo, and each council member was allowed to appoint a person. I got appointed that. And we did some pretty serious headway with some of the problems over there. And we put a lot of time into it. It was a very serious effort. That was his concern, and I wish we had talked about that. But Don Moeller is good. He taught municipal law over at Washburn. I took it under him. You know, certainly some of what was reported tonight makes sense. I don't have any opposition to this one. I do have opposition to the next one, so I'll just keep my comments to that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Next is Teresa Miller.
Good evening, I'm Teresa Miller, and I'm with North Topeka West NIA. Bear with me, I have one of my headaches, so my thought process is not that great. First of all, I want to make sure that you understand I am not attacking any person in any type of their job, not the mayor, not the city council, nothing. But what I'm trying to say is, this committee, as I read 50-some pages a while ago, and I'm trying to cram it in there, is that this committee not only was formed by Everhart, it was also formed by our now mayor, Larry Wolgast. How can our now mayor, and this contains everything to do with a mayor, pick his personal people to be on this committee and not have the turnout of what is coming out of this committee? That was one of my questions. I thought also that when we voted, as the people voted, that we voted for a type of government where the city manager was the one that did a lot of the voting and a lot of input for us, for the people. And now I'm being told that now the mayor and the city manager. But when we first voted, the people, as I understand, always thought that the city manager was the authority that we went to, and no longer would be the mayor had any power. So that might be just how I see it. Like I say, it has nothing to do with personal people. So that was my main concern, is that out of this committee, and I voiced this to the committee when I went to one of the meetings, is how can someone that assigns people to this committee won't come out with the outcome that we're having right now, the recommendations that we give more power to the person that put the committee together in the first place. That's just something I want to bring out forward. I will talk to you later about the other part of the city council stuff when it comes up. Thank you.
Thank you. And just a point of clarification, the appointment process was, when it was announced, then, as we do for all appointments, the city council members have an opportunity to make recommendations, nominations for the committee, and which they did for this committee. And then the mayor appoints or nominates them and the council approves. So just to clarify that particular process. The next person to speak is Johnny Jackson. I'm sorry, Councilman.
I just
Schmidt.
wanted to make a point to that too, since I attended many of those meetings, that the chairman of that committee was tasked with setting the agenda of that committee, and it was not put forth by either the mayor or the council. They had full authority to review whatever they felt was needed in the charter and in the form of government.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson?
Well, some of this stuff I agree with and some I don't, but I think when this committee was formed, it should have been, each council member should have been able to pick their person to be on that committee. There's not one person on this committee that's from District 2. And that, You know, that just makes us feel like we haven't got a voice. And I think, you know, we voted on this years ago to have the council and city manager form of government. I think the city manager is the one that should do everything that the council tells him to do. That's his job, not your job. And that's the way it should be. You know, the thing is, they give you power, then what's gonna happen 3, 4, 5 years down the road from now, and you're still in here, that you want more power. Then if you got more power, there's no reason to have a city manager. That's what his job is. And is this just on part A or all of this part for the mayor?
This is on this particular charter ordinance that, as was explained, pertains to the role of the mayor with the council and the veto. It does not have to do, there's a separate ordinance on the
Okay.
election of the council members.
Well, there's a deal there, the two here on the veto that if people don't like it, that they can get a petition to change it. Falls under the same thing it did with Heartland Park. You can't have a petition on an ordinance. So that needs to be changed.
Okay.
And, you know, it's just, they should have thought about that when, you know, going through all this Heartland Park deal. Because that right there spelled it out plain. You can't petition the ordinance.
Okay.
That's all I got to say on that.
Okay, and just a point of clarification, the charter states that there are 5 members of the Citizens Review Committee. So 5 council districts had a representative, there will be 4 that were not, and that's said in the charter, the number, so.
All these people on this committee, though, most of them's all from one district.
No, there are 5, each one is from a different district.
Yeah, but there's 9 districts.
I said, yeah, and they represent 5 of those districts.
We're left out.
Okay. That completes the comments, public comment. Are there discussion items from the council?